Yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
we're all good. So let me just quickly introduce y'all. This is, I just want to make sure, Chaeeun Park and Tiffany Doung, both from Hack for Impact, and they're going to be giving a great design workshop today. So if everyone's ready, let's sit back and let the experts take the show here.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. So, hi, my name is Tiffany. I'm co-director of Hack for Impact UIUC, and then we have Chaeeun joining us as the director of design from Hack for Impact Georgia Tech, which is named Bits of Good. We're super excited to teach you guys about design. I know this is as part of a hackathon, so you might be busy programming, but really glad to have you guys join us today to um, talk about and work through design. So in terms of what we're doing today, we'll be talking about the design process and the different fidelity mockups that someone may be doing in the process of a designer in general before teaching you guys how to use Figma, which is a very commonly used design tool. A lot of professionals use it, and we use it within Hack for Impact. And it would be great for us to show you guys how to use it. So if you have not already, please sign up for an account on Figma. They're free, especially with the student email. You can get a really nice membership with that. So we're going to start with the design process as told by Chaeeun here.
Yeah, okay. So you guys are a lot of you are probably familiar with the Stanford D School design thinking model, just because it's been adopted, I feel like, very heavily in many different forms by a lot of companies. But at a high level, it's basically, usually it starts with empathizing, and this means trying to, understand your real world users, their thoughts and feelings within whatever problem space it is that you're in. And then based on the research that you conduct, you can kind of scope out a problem and design a product that addresses that problem. And then you can kind of iterate again and again until you feel that your result is good or like addresses the problem that you set out to solve. And obviously this model is super high level, but it's a good way to kind of abstract the way that you go through a project. Wait, is there anything you wanted to add on, Tiffany, to that?
Good.
Okay.
Cool.
Next slide. And so this is this kind of looks intimidating when you first see it, but basically this is like the double diamond method. This is the one I'm really familiar with as an industrial design major, but it's a bit more detailed than the design thinking model. And I think this model is a lot more useful and a lot more helpful when you're actually creating and designing, because it's a much more structured process. And so it helps you like hold yourself accountable to doing certain things within the process. So in general, the double diamond splits the design process into 4 really distinct stages. Usually it's called some form of like discover, define, develop, and deliver. And so the stages are also split between periods of diverging or, broadening your problem scope, and converging, which is like narrowing your problem scope. So starting on the very left, when you're first starting out, basically when you start out any project, you've identified some area of interest or some areas of interest, and you kind of want to explore because you don't really know that much you haven't pinpointed exactly what you're going to do yet. So at this stage, you have a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty. So the discovery phase really helps fill in some of these gaps. So you want to collect information here that's relevant to your area of interest. So you want to diverge and you learn as much as you can, basically. And so that often means talking to experts, because it might be a field you're not that familiar with, and or observing real world users and their behaviors. So sometimes that means that you are conducting things like site visits and immersing yourself in the life of your target user group. And then you want to talk to people so that you can gain a really deep understanding of the space that you're in. And this is what I was talking about before with the Stanford D School design thinking model about empathizing in the beginning. And so, these direct interactions with your real world users is kind of considered what your primary research basically within design. And you can also conduct some secondary research at this stage, or, research done by other researchers. So by the end of the discovery phase, you've basically developed a very good understanding of the space you're in. So once you've talked to enough users and gathered enough research, you want to basically synthesize everything that you have and extract the key insights from the research to kind of narrow down your scope. So there isn't an exact like quantifiable metric for when you know you're done with like the discovery phase, but like as a general rule of thumb, I think if you can extract several key patterns in your research, that's usually a good indicator that you're ready to move on, or like data saturation as they call it. So if you can, so basically like once you've kind of done that and extracted your key insights, you can basically like turn those research insights into actionable design criteria. So this is the very middle of the diamond. And a lot of times this is called the design brief. And basically that's where you set out some like quantifiable success metrics to be able to determine whether or not your design meets your users' needs. So this is kind of like the way that designers are able to hold themselves accountable to make sure that their design meets like a certain standard baseline quality. So, you know, design criteria are very, very important because, you know, otherwise, if you don't have it, there's really no way to judge your design. So you don't really know if you're being successful or not. And then from your design brief, you kind of want to diverge again and start thinking about different approaches to like your design and kind of how to approach like designing your product or service. And then from there, you ideate, you know, a bunch of different ideas and you refine your ideas through testing. And I think, yes, that's it.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Chaeeun. So within all of Chaeeun said there, I'm going to summarize a little bit briefly. I know there's a lot of information within that diagram, but also specifically within product design of web interfaces, which is likely what you're looking at. Wanted to define product design as imagining and creating products with a specific user audience in mind. So a lot of times within product design for digital interfaces, we'll break this down into UI and UX. And usually they're grouped together. So UI standing for user interface, thinking about all the graphical things you may think. And then what we're really designing for too at the end of the day is the user experience, which is something that really comes out within the different converging and diverging methods of design thinking or human-centered design or whatever framework that you're using to organize your design methodology. So within user experience, things that we're thinking about is the usability of whatever application you're creating. This can go into different aspects, thinking about if users are able to complete the tasks that you want them to and how easily are they able to do so, as well as what components on the screen show up and do actually what they intend them to do. So you can learn more about this through different testing as well as the user research process. So at the end of the day, why does product design matter? So obviously it ends up creating products that are prettier, that's great, but better products with validated assumptions means that it's more usable. And if it's good enough, then people will use it and drive the impact, whether it be through the clicks you're trying to do and the different sorts of ads you're trying to get different sorts of like revenue from, or from just using your product in general. And thinking through impact, product design matters. So we're gonna begin talking about low fidelity prototyping first. So if we think about the different stages of design, there's low fidelity, so those are your beginning sketches, and mid fidelity has a little bit more detail, and then high fidelity, it's kind of almost how your final product is going to look. So within low fidelity, one of the first things you may do when you're thinking about creating these different products after you've done all the user research and such is that you're going to look at similar products out on the market or within the space that you're looking into. So this is called competitive analysis or competitive audits. So trying to look at the different interactions that a user may make on those screens. A good component or proponent, a good principle of UX is trying to use common patterns throughout all of your different designs. If people are using or people are used to doing something on Facebook or scrolling through a feed, then you'll want that same kind of scrolling mechanism or common UX patterns within your application. So competitive audits you may do for similar applications. And then when you're doing so, you'll want to get or keep track of these different interactions or different features to see what is out there and like maybe what you can copy or what your application should have. As well, we also have an information architecture, if Chaeeun would like to talk about it a little more.
Yeah, so I guess like information architecture within design is basically like the structure of information within a product or a system. So mapping information architecture is kind of the process of laying out the content of your product or service. So I guess like an important distinction to make between kind of like information architecture, user flows and user experience in general is that user flows are used to kind of lay out a user's movement throughout a product. You'll often hear some people use it like interchangeably between like information architecture and user flow. So like the name suggests, the flow demonstrates kind of progression. So user flows have some type of starting point, and information architecture doesn't really demonstrate movement. It really just like lays out the entire structure of how your product is organized, and it's much more focused on user goals. And then UX encompasses both information architecture and user flows. So because you need to consider both kind of the overall structure of your product and how your user moves through your product to create a holistic experience. In addition, UX considers a lot of other factors like aesthetics and comfort, general user feelings while interacting with your product. So I actually was talking about this a while ago, and I found this great quote that kind of sums up how to think about information architecture in design. And it says, if you've ever tried to use something and thought, where am I supposed to go next? Or this doesn't make any sense, you're probably encountering an issue with information architecture. So, you can have a very visually beautiful product with very delightful interactions. But if the information organization is confusing to the user, or the user doesn't know how to access or navigate certain parts of your product that are meant to be accessed and interacted with, your product will not be very successful, no matter how pretty it is.
Then after some low fidelity sketching that you may do, you're going to move on to prototyping. So within prototyping, what's important to kind of zoom in on is how we talked a little bit about design thinking earlier and trying to get insights from our users or audiences that would be using our product. But then you guys have also heard different methodologies out there of like lean or agile, especially when we think about software development. So where we want to do, and when we come into this process, is to do our interviews as early as possible in our process so that whatever insights we gather can be implemented within our final product or within the then different agile cycles that one may go through. So within mid-fidelity prototyping, there's a focus on usability. It doesn't necessarily matter that it looks exactly what the end product looks like, or it has all the right colors and fonts that one may want to have, but to focus on the usability and to then give it to the user and see how they interact with it. And with prototyping too, it's important to get your feedback as early as possible so then you can actually make these changes. So it's good to give them users a mid-fidelity prototype so that they can give you honest feedback when they think that you haven't spent way too much time on trying to perfect every detail and corner. So one of the things that I like to use for prototyping at the mid-fidelity stage or even low fidelity is Whimsical. So Whimsicals are really easy to use web application. So I've laid out the information architecture for a website that I was creating at the top. So you can see the different components I'd want in there. So talking about on the homepage, I'd want to show the sponsorships. On the About Us page, I'd want to show like our mission and goals. And then on the right side, you can see how I've started to lay out how these different pages would look. Especially with a tool like Whimsical, you can easily drag and drop the different logos or components you'd want and to label them and have all the different lorem ipsum that you might need. And at this point in time, like if you gave this to a software developer, they would kind of generally know what you're going for in terms of the product, but then it doesn't necessarily show like the details or the colors that you need. So after that, one of the things you could do is also work on different versions of all the different interactions you're doing. So if you want to, for example, access your groups, maybe you want to access it this is for like fake Twitter, basically. If you want to access your groups, you might want to be able to do it from multiple different entry points, but then also just thinking about the different ways you could do that. So having all these different prototypes makes it easier then to choose what you'd want, or to show it to a user and see which one they would prefer. So another way you can see this is that within these different categories, having examples of content copy might be useful to just see how long these different pieces of information should be and how many characters or words it would encompass. So needing inspiration for these different UIs, these are a bunch of different helpful guidelines or websites to look at. I'll point out a few of these. So Dribble, for example, is a really popular design website with case studies that you could check out. Sometimes they might not necessarily be usable, they're more just pretty, but that's an example. Going at these other ones, there's also like Google Material Design, which is a common framework people may be using, and also looking at a lot of different case studies. You can look up things like Google case study or whatever interaction or app you've ever thought of. There's some designer out there that's probably reworked it or worked on it, creating it, and just reading through the case study and seeing their process towards creating their application.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna briefly go over design guidelines. So designers in industry usually adhere to certain design guidelines, and these are just kind of best practices to follow in order to ensure that the design that you produce meets, certain larger principles. Like a good example is the Google Material Design Guidelines. So these are especially useful because, if you're using any like predefined design system, meaning there are like certain icons or like graphical styles or like text styles that are already defined for you, you may want to create, custom elements that follow this design system. So guidelines really help you create this custom content in a way that still adheres to your design system while being more flexible. So like Tiffany said, once you have like your medium fidelity prototypes done and you've tested them and you've gotten feedback on what you can improve, and you can like slowly move to increasing fidelity. So high fidelity basically just means that your designs are representative of what a user would see if they were actually using your product or service. And like the whole reason why we kind of do that iteration is because you don't want to be putting a lot of effort into like the small details and then figure out that something foundational about your design is wrong and then have to rework everything. So that's why it's good to kind of like start off very basic and then start increasing fidelity until you reach like a certain level of fidelity where it's like it's representative of what like a user would actually see if they were using your product or service. Okay, so I guess we're gonna move into the Figma part of this workshop. So just some general practices. I'm gonna show you guys an example, but just basically for when you're working on Figma, when you're working in Figma, some basic things that to keep in mind is usually people are using Figma because it's a really good like design collaboration tool. So typically there's like a certain way a lot of people like to organize their page. Figma has like a nice commenting feature that's really useful for providing feedback for designs. And then Figma also has a lot of features that help you create your own design system within the application. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so I can show an example. Okay. So this is just an example project from our Hack for Impact chapter, one of the projects, but basically I just wanted to show you what their Figma file kind of looks like. So you can see that they have different pages for different aspects and iterations of their design. So they have their like low fidelity wireframes in one page, and then they made a separate page for their medium fidelity. And you can see here that they left on the comments, they left like feedback from their team. And then also this is really good for if you're collaborating between like design and engineering, because the like here you can see like the engineering manager for the team, whenever he had a question, he would just comment and be like asking them specific questions about like how something was supposed to look or like how it's going to be developed, and they would respond and answer his questions. So it's like really good to collaborate across different roles. Yeah. Okay, and then so I talked a little about design systems earlier when I was talking about design guidelines, but basically like for design systems, they're basically just elements and styles that can be used and combined to create designs. So they're most useful because they can be used to manage designs at scale. So if you imagine like you have to make a bunch of screens for some app or like some service, it'd be a pain to have to do everything manually, especially since in most apps there are certain elements that are repeated a lot. So being able to like make your own design system or being able to utilize a already existing design system is very useful. And Figma makes that really easy because, as you can see on the right, that's kind of that properties panel, that's how styles look on Figma. And you can basically set different like text styles and color styles and even like effect styles and combine those to create your own design system.
Okay, and then moving on to components. So Chaeeun mentioned quite a bit about components and how they're really useful within Figma, but as a lot of you may be familiar with, components are also used within React. So the ability for Figma to have these different components and for those to directly translate into things that engineers can use is so widely useful within design collaborations. So as you can see, if you were to create like a card component within Figma as something shown on the left, and the fact, as Chaeeun pointed out, that it would be the same on each page and you could easily copy them over. And if you edited one of them, you would edit them all. You could also easily translate all of that into a React component as seen on the right. Same thing essentially on this page as well. So if you want to check out how you may be able to duplicate that and use props to customize the content for each. This is why components within Figma and React so greatly helpful, makes the divide between design and engineering so much smaller. So other things that you may point out or see throughout this is how Figma shows mask outlines by default, and that goes around each different component or like different icon or anything that you may use within Figma. So that's labeled by like the little purple text that you see. And yeah, that's other things. So if anyone wants to chime in for a moment, this is audience participation. So what are some components you may see on this page? You can either type this into the chat or unmute your mic. Yeah, okay. So I'd say indeed like the sidebar, the nav bar, search bar, and the videos. So like, as we were saying earlier, each video could be a different component and you're just copying it over. So thank you for putting that into the chat. Then, okay, now we're to the big kahuna part of this presentation. So into the Figma tutorial, and we'll be teaching you several of these different processes as taught by Chaeeun. So if you want to drop the link into the chat, if you haven't already, sign up for Figma. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just dropped the link to the Figma file in the chat. So either you guys can like go to the Figma file and follow along with what I'm doing, or you can just like view what I'm doing and then try it on your own later. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so I already created what I'm going to kind of walk you guys through, but yeah, we're just gonna create a like profile page. So what I'm gonna do is, oh yeah, if you guys want to follow along, just go ahead and like copy and paste the frame that says duplicate this to work off of. But so I'm gonna create a new frame here. And I chose the iPhone 11 Pro. They have a lot of preset sizes, which is super useful. So I'm going to move that over. Oh, wow, there's so many cursors flying around. Okay, so I have my frame now, and basically I usually like to edit like the corner radius of my frames, especially if I'm using it for like an iPhone, just so it has kind of that rounded look. So if you go to the right here under frame, you can edit the corner radius, and I'm just going to set it to 30, so it has that filleted look. So once I have that, I'm going to first change the background color of my frame to black, as you can see here. So if I go to fill here, you can basically like select a color, but what I'm going to do is, if you see this icon over here with the four dots, that is the Figma icon for styles. So if I click it, I can either select the styles that I've already created, or I can create a new color style. So I'm just gonna select the background. And if you want to detach it, there's just like this break link icon, and you can use that to remove the style. And if you want to create a style, then you basically just like set the color that you want it to be. And then you go to the style icon, and then you hit the little plus to create a style, and you can name it whatever you want. And then you've like created a new style within the file. So I'm going to remove that. Okay. So once I have my background, I'm going to create my profile picture now. So what I'm going to do is go here to the shape selector on the top left. I'm going to create a rectangle. And I'm going to make it the same width as the iPhone frame, but then set the height to 433. Okay. And then just so you can see it better, I'm going to change the color. Okay. So you can see that if you drag this shape within the frame, it automatically kind of like basically masks it for you, so you don't have to like change the corner radius of the rectangle that you're dragging in or anything. But okay, so once I have that and I've set it down in my frame, I'm going to go ahead and add my profile picture, which I just like dragged in here beforehand up here. So I'm going to drag that in, and if you just like drag it into the rectangle, Figma will recognize that you're trying to put it into the rectangle shape and automatically basically mask it for you. If you need to like mask something manually, if you look at the top of Figma, the little icon over here that Zoom is hiding from me with the kind of like the crescent moon almost, that's the masking icon. So if you just click that, it'll manually mask things for you. So once I kind of have my profile picture done, I want to add my name. So what I'm going to do is up on the top right or the top left, I'm going to select the text tool, and I'm going to type my name. And right now it's set to black. I'm going to go ahead and change the color here. And then, okay, so now I'm going to go over text styles, very similar to color styles, but on the properties panel in the right, basically like under the text column, you can either like, if you have preset text styles, select from those, or like create new text styles. So I already made one called name title that I'm going to select, but it's basically the same thing. You can detach the style and then hit the little style icon, and then the little plus to create your own text style, if you want to do that. So I'm just going to apply the name title, and then for this one, I'm going to go ahead and center it. And Figma has a lot of like automated layout things that you can use, so it'll show you. But if you're trying to like manually align it, if you look at the very top of the properties panel, they have some like alignment tools for you. So if you hit this tool here, it'll align it on the vertical axis, and then if you hit this one here, it'll align it along the horizontal axis. So I'm not going to align it along the horizontal axis, but I will align it along the vertical axis. So once I have my name, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to create component variants. So this add friend button over here. So, okay, I'm going to select the rectangle tool, make a little rectangle shape. Don't remember exactly what the size was, so I'm gonna. Okay, so once I have my rectangle, first I'm going to align it vertically, so it's along it's centered along with my name, and then I'm going to change the color to white here, and then I'm going to add some text that says. So this is basically like a button. Okay, so once I have this, I'm going to show you guys how auto layout works, because I think auto layout is one of the very useful features of Figma. So you want to select everything that's going to be in your auto layout component. So in this case, for this button, it'll be the text within the button and the background of the button. So I select both of those. And if you're on Mac, to add auto layout, you just hit Shift A. Or if you want to do it manually, if you go to the properties panel on the right, you can also add auto layout. Okay, so wait, so I'm gonna. Oh, why is it being buggy? Okay, I'm going to use this as an example. Okay, so I kind of wanted to demonstrate kind of what's useful about auto layout, in that it's especially useful, say you're like making a button and you want to change the text within the button. If you like, you can see that the more I type it, the padding around the button doesn't change, even though the amount of like letters changes. So I think that's super useful. So like if you're designing an app and you're using the same style of button, but like the button's function changes, this is super useful. So I'm going to leave that there. And then I'm going to create this bottom element you see here. So I'm going to take the rectangle tool again, make it the width of the frame. And then you guys don't necessarily have to do this, since it's going to be on the bottom and it's going to be masked anyways, but just to show you guys, you can also edit the corner radius of each corner of this rectangle. So if you go here, where I showed you where the corner radius tool was earlier on the right, if you hit this little, the independent corners icon, you can actually edit each corner. So I'm going to edit the bottom two so that they match the rest of the frame, and then drag it down to the bottom, and then change the color to white.
And then, Chaeeun, it looks like you have a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, what does it say?
Oh yeah, he was asking, when I do auto layout, I think my text goes behind the rectangle. Am I doing something wrong?
Yeah, sometimes, hold on. Let me quickly. So sometimes when you use so originally Figma did auto layout for frames. So it was originally made to be used for like, you'd basically have to set your background to be a frame, and then you'd add like text or icons or whatever it is, and you'd add auto layout. But they did recently change it so that you can add it to shapes, and but it's still kind of like buggy. So if you want to avoid that, just try to avoid using shapes and instead just like use frames instead. So instead of using a rectangle shape, use a frame. But yeah, sometimes it's like weird when you don't use a frame and you use a shape instead. But I do think it's very useful. So I'm just gonna add text here and
And then also to point out, the order that you see on the left for the layers is the order that they are seen in terms of like, if something ends up being behind something, so it's lower in the order, you can move it above by moving it.
oh yeah. If you need to like change the order, you can drag the element wherever you want within the layers panel on the left. So once I have that, I'm going to create this thing you see here, basically like the little navigation, circle navigation. So I'm gonna hit the ellipse tool and I'm going to make a little circle. And then I'm going to, if you want to remove filler stroke, it's very easy. You just hit the little minus. So I'm going to add a stroke instead and change the width to 2 here. And then once I've done that, I'm going to basically copy and paste it. So I have 2 of them, and then add fill to this one. So it looks like you're on like the first of 2 pages. So I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to add auto layout. So Shift A, and then center these along the same axis as my name and then the add friend button. So top right align. And then, so a really useful trick for auto layout that I've found super helpful when like making multiple screens. And in this case, it's like when you have like, you're making like a navigation, you're like trying to navigate between 2 different pages, is when you have auto layout and you have like identical components, you can kind of like switch up the layers, but it looks like you're changing the well, actually, hold on, I'll just demonstrate it. So if I select this circle here and then I just like move it over here, you can see that it basically requires no work. Like I didn't have to like redo anything. I just have to like move the layer over and it looks like I just like went to the second page. So I think that's like super useful. It really only works when you have identical, like visually identical elements. But like it's super useful in a lot of cases when you're making apps, because apps usually utilize some type of thing like that, like navigation or like thumbnails, where that's super useful. So I find that very helpful. And yeah, and then I guess like the last thing I wanted to show was the component variants. So I kind of like pre-made it here, but basically one like useful thing about Figma is they allow you to basically like when you, okay, so for example, I'm gonna turn this into a component. So to turn it into a component, you want to right click and then click create component. So once I've made my component, to make my variant, I'm gonna make like a separate frame for this. So I'm going to create a new frame and I'm going to call this one my add friend button, just to demonstrate what it's for. And so I'm going to actually move this over here. Let me just change the frame color so you guys can see this better. Okay, so once I have this, I'm going to change the name of this. It's going to be my add friend button primary. And the reason I do this is because I'm going to make a version of this button, but like when people hover over it. So this will be what it looks like when people hover over the add friend button. So I'm going to copy and paste it, and then I'm going to right click, and you can detach, click detach instance. Basically what that does is you can keep the visual style of your component, but it's no longer a component. So I'm going to change this so that it's outlined instead of filled. And then change the text color here. Okay, so this is what I want the button to look like when people hover over it. So once I have what the button's gonna look like, I select all the items, and then I make this into a separate component. So create component, and I'm going to name this, instead of primary, I'm going to call it hover, add friend button hover. And I'm going to paste this here again. But this is super useful. So if you look on the right, I've like selected the button. There's this new thing that pops up here. And it says here that you're in the primary state right now, but if you click it, you can switch between the different states. So this is like, yeah, super useful when you're like trying to demonstrate a change in state, whether that be like hover or tap. That way you don't have to like manually replace the elements. So I think that's, yeah, that's like a super useful feature of Figma. And I think most other, like if you've used other design tools like Adobe XD and things like that, they have their own way of doing this. But yeah, I think the Figma way is very intuitive. But yeah, is there anything else you want me to go over, Tiffany?
No, I think this is great. We're about ready to finish up our workshop. Indeed.
Okay, I'll
good.
stop sharing.
Okay, wait. I'm trying to figure out how to full screen this again. Now we can all just watch my laptop. It'll take really long to load. Chaeeun, if you also have the workshop slides, you can pull them up. I think my laptop does not do too hot in these scenarios.
Okay, I got you. Let me share my.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of everything that we've shown you so far with Figma, so we've often exasperated how the power of Figma components directly translates into React components, or even just if you wanted to copy any of the styling, so the colors, backgrounds, text size directly from the Figma, that's totally possible. Then, yeah, next slide. Yeah, so with HTML, CSS, React, as you can see on the right, the properties of any of your components or things that you create within Figma are very easily stated on the right. So you can copy exactly pixel by pixel, like how tall you made it within Figma, you can make it on your web design as well. And directly just copy and paste even. So some miscellaneous design advice or some resources that we've prepared here as well are some things about portfolios. So there you can use any of these different like bundles, for example, to or like for this bundle, you can use it to use a bunch of web services for free. You should consider making your portfolio with React if you'd like to. Notion is a really common to use web app nowadays. So it's really easy to create your portfolio on that, or to put together basically a mini website if you want to route it through Notion. And yeah, we've had some solid case studies if you'd like to check out on this page as well. We'll also be sharing this presentation with you. Then next slide. These are some more resources. So as part of Hack for Impact, we've created or compiled these different resources into this guide that you can check out, and also look at additional resources there. And also Cofolios is a really popular website. You can chat with interns or full-time employees at popular tech companies and ask them about UX and UI and anything of that sort. They're there to help you and provide office hours if you're trying to get into the field, or you want feedback on your own work. And yeah, looking at other people's portfolios, and of course, making projects at hackathons such as these are really great ways to learn the design process or to get involved within technology. So yeah, without further ado, thank you so much for coming through to our workshop, for listening to us for the last 45 minutes or so, and hope you guys do well on your projects this weekend.